Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
the low wages that they are presenting to you are a slap in the face.
A strike cancels some classes at University of Illinois Chicago.
Sheriffs across Illinois say they will not fully enforce the so-called assault weapons ban. We speak with one of them.
A look at what's behind the soaring price of eggs.
January has been unseasonably warm, but that's expected to change soon. We're one-on-one with the state's climatologist.
Plans for the makeover of the city's historic LaSalle Street corridor begin to take shape.
As an increasing number of migrants and asylum seekers are making their homes in Chicago, we look at what it actually means to be a sanctuary city.
I'm Angelito, and coming up tonight, we're trying food for the soul at a new restaurant in Lawndale.
But first, some of today's top stories. Commonwealth Edison is asking regulators for a $1.5 billion rate increase starting in 2024. The utility says the 4-year hike will help with increased demands to power electric vehicles and to deal with climate change. The total package boils down to about an additional $7 per month in the first year rate increase, the first year of the rate increase. By year 4 of the deal, customers will be paying $17 more per month. If approved, the rate increase would mean an additional $900 million in revenue for ComEd in the company's steepest 1-year rate hike ever. That's a profit of 10.5%.
The Chicago Bears have a new Papa Bear. The team officially introduced its new president and CEO, Kevin Warren. He's the 5th to hold the position in the team's storied history. Warren is replacing Ted Phillips, who will retire next month. He's got quite a task ahead of him, namely turning around the worst team in the NFL and steering the team's proposed move to Arlington Heights.
We're not going to take shortcuts. We're going to build an incredible franchise. I came here to win championships, to win the NFC North, to win the NFC, to win the Super Bowl, to help shepherd and lead a stadium development project.
Police in Peoria are investigating an overnight fire at a Planned Parenthood facility. Officials suspect the clinic was intentionally set on fire only days after Governor J.B. Pritzker signed a bill expanding abortion protections. No patients or staff were inside at the time, but according to the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Illinois, Jennifer Welch, the fire caused, quote, significant damage. In a statement, Welch says, while we did offer medication abortion at Peoria, it was not a site for in-clinic procedures. This act of vandalism will have a devastating impact on the community's ability to access birth control, cancer screenings, and gender-affirming care. We will not stop providing the essential health care our patients need and deserve.
And coming up in the program, the state's new assault weapons ban is now in effect, but some sheriffs say they will not enforce it.
But first, UIC faculty are on strike. Amanda Vinicki joins us with the latest right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Many students returned to school today after being off for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. But many of the 34,000 students at the University of Illinois Chicago had another day off of classes, this one unscheduled due to a strike. Amanda Vinicki joins us now with more. Amanda, who's on strike and why?
Yeah, Brandis, today is the first day of the UIC staff strike, and how long it will last at this point is impossible to say. President of UIC United Faculty, Aaron Kroll, is also co-chair of the union's bargaining team.
We are here fighting for a fair contract. We are here fighting for our students, and it is no exaggeration to say that we are here fighting for the future of higher education.
The union's contract expired mid-August. Professors and lecturers have been working since then under provisions of the last contract. The university says it's met with the union 31 times in an attempt to reach a new deal, including a marathon of recent talks, but still no agreement. Kroll says outstanding disputes are over a handful of issues. Pay, job security for non-tenure staff. The union wants more notice if those lecturers' contracts won't be renewed. A greater union role in university decisions. You often hear that known as shared governance. Also, mental health supports for students. Kroll says they see students struggling with depression, anxiety, also learning disabilities.
We're feeling like we're being asked to complete an impossible task. When we send our students to go find help over at the support services, we expect them to get help, and right now we hear all too often that they're not getting the help they need.
The union is asking the university to provide more mental health services and psychological and neuropsychological assessments.
Your administration, who has refused to do it up till now, then said to you yesterday, oh, it's not your business. Really? Not your business? It's everybody's business in this city. Of course it's your business. And that is what bargaining for the common good means.
Now, the university yesterday did unveil a plan to put $4.5 million more towards student mental health services. More counselors, a wellness drop-in space, and a social work trainee field unit. But this notion of bargaining for the common good gets to the heart of what we've seen with other strikes, including walkouts by the Chicago Teachers Union over issues like supports for homeless students and families. CTU President Stacey Davis Gates says that movement is about bread and butter issues, but also the rest of the buffet.
We are going to have to continue to draw more stark lines in the sand when it comes to how we union in this city, in this state, in this country. Because how we union will determine if people get health care. How we union will determine how much funding comes into our school communities.
Amanda, what about those bread and butter issues? You mentioned pay. How does that factor in?
Yes, Brandis, we don't want to leave out pay because, yes, that is a major point of dispute.
I know what it's like sitting across the table from people who are out of touch with the workers and what we do. I sat across from the table from bosses who looked at us and undervalued us and didn't appreciate the work that we do. But I'm here to tell you that without you, this place will not run. And the administration here needs to understand that the low wages that they are presenting to you are a slap in the face, and they can do better.
Union leaders could not give me an estimate of how much their demands would cost, but they say UIC can afford it. One lecturer I spoke with said for her, pay is the issue.
What's most important is compensation. It's very difficult. The cost of living is constantly increasing. We had been working for pennies for so long. Just to give you a little context, when I started at UIC in 2015, they had just negotiated for a contract which was about $32,000. And so now we see where we are. People are starting at maybe 50 or 51. It's just insulting for a Research One institution.
The union asking for minimum pay around $60,000. Those participating in the strike, by the way, are not getting paid while it's going on. How many staff that includes, we don't know. The university says union members do not have to inform UIC whether they will strike, and the university is not permitted to inquire about their status. So we do not have a figure of how many classes were canceled. Certainly not all. I spoke with some students on campus who were aware of the strike, but several said they were unclear on the details, and they still were rushing off to their classes. Other students were at the rally in support of their teachers.
And Amanda, what is the university's take on all this?
So I did reach out, of course, to the university, which said no to a request for an interview, also offered no specific statement. But the chancellor and provost did post a letter online yesterday, noting that the entire campus is not affected. Classes in the colleges of medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, and law are not impacted because those faculty are not part of the union. Same for courses taught by teaching assistants. UIC encouraged students to check their online blackboards, and unless they hear otherwise, they should still be showing up to class. If class is interrupted, the school says makeup arrangements must be implemented. UIC values the faculty for their key role in upholding and championing the university's academic mission. Based on the shared principles between all involved, the university remains optimistic that a fair and beneficial bargaining agreement can be achieved, that letter reads. Now, Brandis, the two sides do return to the bargaining table tomorrow. The union president says he doesn't know if everything can get wrapped up within that period, but he does say that he hopes it will be a short strike.
I'm sure lots of people hope that it'll be a short strike. Amanda, thank you.
Thank you.
And now to Paris and enforcement of a new state law. Paris.
Brandis, it's now illegal to buy or sell certain so-called assault weapons like semi-automatic rifles and guns that have more than 10 rounds of ammunition. Gun control groups across the country have praised this new law, but it has gotten pushback from the gun industry. And now a group of state sheriffs are joining in against the law, saying simply they won't enforce it. And joining us is Jeff Bullard, Sheriff of downstate Jefferson County. We also reached out to Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart, who is in support of the recently passed legislation, but he was unable to join us for tonight's discussion. Sheriff Bullard, we are glad that you're with us. Welcome to Chicago tonight. So when you say you're not enforcing the assault weapons ban, what does that mean in practicality?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Paris. Any kind of public safety initiative that involves the criminal justice system has to start at the core of the Constitution. We can't come up with any strategies or techniques that would violate any aspect of the Constitution. I sit on the Illinois Sheriff's Association Legislative Committee. We saw this bill in process for the Protect Illinois Communities Act, and we had problems with many aspects of it and saw that it clearly violated not only the Second Amendment of our federal Constitution, but also existing case law in the United States Supreme Court. So we gave our feedback through the legislative process and knew that if it passed as it was written, that it would not be something that we would be willing to enforce, because our oath, first and foremost, is to uphold the state and national constitutions, and this law is in contrary to that.
And basically, you're saying you're not going to arrest folks or go knocking door to door if they're not complying with this law, including folks that have their weapons grandfathered in under this law that now will have to register them, although that's a function of the Illinois State Police. So do sheriffs really have a role to play in this law?
Oh, absolutely, Paris. The sheriff is the top-ranking peace officer in every county. And and you can look up in Illinois statute that there is a duty to intervene statute that recently came along the last 2 to 3 years. It says, and it talks about police use of force, but basically it calls for peace officers that if they see a civil rights being violated, if they see excessive force being used, which is a civil rights violation, that we have a duty to intervene. So it's not just that we're not going to enforce it from our office. Being the chief constitutional peace officer in each county, it's my duty to stop civil rights violations from happening in my county. So that's it goes way beyond just not enforcing.
At the same time, the question of what constitutes a weapon that you would be able to keep under the Second Amendment, that's still being litigated. I mean, in Maryland, there's a case in the appellate court. So what about this law do you find unconstitutional?
Well, the courts have already ruled on it. The High Court, in particular, in D.C. versus Heller in 2008, stated that all weapons in common use at the time were protected by the Constitution. And they've not come up with any new technology to provide any new kind of weapons. They're all still the long guns, rifles, shotguns, revolvers, handguns, the same things that we've had for decades. And those weapons are protected by the Constitution. Every weapon that's listed in the Protect Illinois Communities Act, based on the D.C. versus Heller decision, is a common weapon in use at the time, and it is protected under the Constitution. And we get training every year on when we can enter into a house lawfully to conduct a search, when we can properly question and interview someone regarding the Fifth Amendment. And we cannot ignore the Second Amendment and the civil rights while we also go to protect everyone else's rights in the rest of the Bill of Rights. And in the Brune case out of New York last year in June, the United States Supreme Court recognized the fact that the Second Amendment was being treated as a second-class right, and they said enough is enough.
At the same time, Sheriff, I mean, it is the law of Illinois, pending an appeal, but that's still working its way through the legal process. There is no injunction on this law right now, so how can a sheriff pick and choose which law to follow?
Well, that's a very good point to ask, and my answer always is that is the Constitution outranks state law. And understand, a sheriff, being an elected constitutional officer, you can look up the description for a sheriff in Illinois statute, and I'm a conservator of the peace. I'm not a law enforcement officer. Law enforcement is only a tool I use to help maintain public order and safety. And and you can take a look at cases like Tennessee versus Garner back in 1985, where in Tennessee, the state law said you can shoot a fleeing felon, period. And an officer shot a fleeing felon who was no threat to anyone, and the suspect died, and that lawsuit came along, and the United States Supreme Court in that case said the constitutional rights of Garner were much more important than the state law. Yes, the officer followed the law and shot a fleeing felon. However, that it was the duty of government to respect the civil rights first and foremost before the law. And the Supreme Court said that Mr. Garner should not have been shot in that case because he posed no immediate risk to anyone.
At the same time, Sheriff, though, I mean, you say that this does violate the Second Amendment. I think there's still a question of that. Even the most conservative Supreme Court justices have said the Second Amendment is not absolute. There is no absolute right to keep and bear arms. There will be limitations, and this is sort of the gray area being litigated. You mentioned some case law, but how can you confidently say it's constitutional when there still are these questions about it?
Well, to answer that is because I can read the English language and I can read the Constitution. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court justices who have ruled in that manner have stepped outside of their authority. The Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the right to infringe rights either. And the Second Amendment states it shall not be infringed. And there has been infringements over the years, and government and the people have allowed that to a point. But that's not something that was ever within my control. But what it is in my control since December 1st of 2018 as the sheriff of Jefferson County is that if I see a civil rights violation occurring in my county, I'm duty bound to stop it. And I can say with 100% certainty that the Protect Illinois Communities Act is a violation of the Second Amendment. Registering firearms, forcing registry of firearms turns the Second Amendment from an inalienable right.
Are you saying you're going to stop the Illinois State Police from trying to register those firearms?
I have put out a notice to the people of Jefferson County that if they're being harassed by agents of governments who are violating any of their civil liberties, that they should contact me so I can be aware of it and develop a strategy on how to deal with it.
All right, Sheriff Jeff Bullard from Jefferson County. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
You have a good night, Paris. Thank you.
And you as well. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, what was once a cheap source of protein has become a luxury breakfast food. Egg prices have been soaring over the past year as the worst avian flu outbreak in U.S. history has infected more than 57 million birds, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Here to explain what this means for your wallet and when we can expect prices to come down are Philip Braun, finance professor at Northwestern University, and Cliff McConville, owner of All Grass Farms in Dundee. Gentlemen, thanks to you both for joining us. Cliff McConville, you farm eggs, of course. Have you had to raise the cost of your eggs?
Well, we haven't raised the price about 6 months, but we did raise our prices last summer, primarily because the feed costs were going up so much over the last 2 years. We've seen our feed prices increase by about 40%. And so we haven't raised them because of a shortage, mostly because we just had to cover that increased cost of the feed. But we are considering another price increase. We'll just have to see. We're getting a lot of demand right now because a lot of the grocery stores are running out of eggs or running short. So something for us to consider.
Right, and I noticed on your website that eggs are out of stock on your website. I imagine you are still able to sell them, though, to walk-in customers at your store.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Cliff, explain for us, if you would, how you raise your chickens so that you were able to avoid the bird flu that's crippling so many farmers.
Well, we've been raising eggs for about 12 years, and I think this is the third wave of avian bird flu that's come through. And the first year I was really nervous because we raise our chickens outdoors. They're on grass. They mingle with wildlife, birds, geese in our pastures. And so I was really nervous the first year. But I found over the years that it seems like the farmers like me that raise our chickens outdoors have a more robust immune system, because I haven't heard of any farmers that raise their chickens outdoors that have had problems with avian influenza. I think it's primarily a problem for the big confinement houses where most eggs come from. But those chickens, where you've got hundreds of thousands of chickens jammed into a building is not good for their immune systems, and I think they're just more susceptible to it.
Professor Braun, how much of a factor is inflation in egg prices right now?
A minor factor. The main factor of inflation is on feed costs and transportation costs for eggs. But the predominant thing driving egg prices right now is bird flu. But feed costs have gone dramatically up, partly because of the Russia-Ukraine war, and petroleum costs, of course, have gone up.
Is this sort of the perfect storm of factors that are leading to these prices that we're seeing for eggs right now?
It's a perfect storm of the bird flu, of the underlying inflation around the world. Particularly for chickens, the cost of feed, including particularly the cost of corn, and that's partly being driven by the cost of fertilizer. So Russia is a major exporter of fertilizer around the world. That supply has been cut off, so that causes fertilizer prices to go up. There have been some droughts around the world for the production of corn. That also caused the price of corn to go up, and so on. So it is a storm.
The Consumer Price Index reports an increase of 59% year over year and 11.1% from November to December. And so to give folks some perspective, a dozen eggs went from $1.50 in January of last year, a year ago, to over $5 this month. Professor Braun, how much of an impact can an increase like this, and such a big increase on one product, what's the impact that has on a family?
Well, it definitely affects family budgets. In December, one of the issues with the price increase was increased demand as the holidays are past. So the expectation is there'll be lower demand for eggs going into the future. And those that still want to consume eggs, it's definitely going to put a pinch into their household budget.
Cliff, a lot of other food businesses also need eggs for what they do. What are some of the ripple effects of such high egg prices?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we sell all of our eggs to consumers, and so none of ours are used for ingredient. But I imagine that bakers use a lot of eggs. I would imagine that's going to affect the price of baked goods. Certainly restaurants, that are buying, eggs are seeing a big increase. So I'm sure they're going to have to pass through that cost. So I think eggs hit a lot of components of the food industry for sure.
Cliff, what do you hear from some of the consumers who come to you for eggs?
Well, it's interesting. I had a lady come in. I heard her this morning in the store, and she goes, "They don't have any eggs at Costco," which is unreal. You figure how many eggs Costco sells. But I think people are getting a little panicky, which, hopefully this is a short-term situation. I think one of the challenges that we hear about from other producers is there's a supply of a shortage of pullets. So when they wipe out, typically if avian influenza wipes out all the laying hens in a chicken house, say they were in mid-production, usually they produce eggs for about a year. If you take them out mid-production, there's not a ready supply of replacement pullet, what are called pullets, that are hens that are ready to lay eggs, and it takes about 20 weeks to raise a chicken old enough to start laying eggs. So I think there's also a big shortage of pullets in the marketplace right now. And so this egg supply shortage may last longer than we expect because it'll take a while to replenish those producing hens.
So at least 20 weeks, it sounds like, if that's how long it takes to produce one of those egg-laying hens. Professor Braun, can families expect to continue paying these higher prices through 2023? When do we think prices might come down?
Consumers really don't have a choice, so I expect that consumption will go down because the prices are so high. The real issue is beef prices are continuing to be high throughout the year. They've been high for over a year and a half now. But the real issue is avian flu and how quickly can you replenish happens, and my understanding can take 6 months. So it's going to take at least a half a year, if not longer.
Okay, so we're along for the ride. That's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to you both, Cliff McConville and Philip Braun. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, soul food with a twist. Stay with us for a taste.
Where have we been? Where are we at? Where are we going?
Essentially to be able to help anyone and everyone in the community, whether that's through academic support, social emotional learning, or just providing a safe space for youth to be able to be there.
This is the fabric of the neighborhood. You need to take care of the neighborhood. It's an ecosystem.
Catch your favorite show at a new time. Chicago Tonight, every weeknight at 10 p.m., starting January 23rd on WTTW.
Less than a week away. Mark your calendars. And there's much more ahead on this show, including a look at when this unseasonably warm January gives way to some colder temps. But first, there's a new go-to place in the city for soul food with a twist. Arts correspondent Angel Ito recently took us to Lawndale for a taste of what's bringing Chicagoans from all over the city to the Soul Food Lounge. Here's another look.
It was after being approached by the Lawndale Christian Development Network to enhance the neighborhood that entrepreneur and chef Quentin Love decided to open what he hopes to be a soul food staple on the city's west side.
When we as a culture want to do something fancy, we go outside of our communities to have that experience.
And so the Soul Food Lounge was born.
The Soul Food Lounge is a place where the trend begins to change, where we deeply invest in upscale right in our own backyard. We don't have any fine dining or more upscale things in our own community that can bring the property values up.
Located off of 16th and Hamlin, just next door to the MLK Legacy Apartments, the Soul Food Lounge offers a wide selection of soul food combinations customers say they haven't seen elsewhere.
It's quaint, it's swanky, you know, it's the food is delicious.
It was a wonderful birthday dinner. The food was superb, delicious.
What did you get?
I got the pot roast with the asparagus. I got the Mississippi crab cake, and then this is the Creole. But we all tried each other's food. The lobster macaroni was...
But the menu selection isn't the only opportunity customers are finding within this new eatery.
I know we deserve it because so many times in our neighborhood we have small corner stores and there's a food desert in our community. So in order for us to eat, we have to go and put resources in someone else's community in the downtown area. I think it's good in the hood. I'm from the hood and I'm good.
You know, as a little girl, I grew up with my mom. She always took us out dining. It's an experience. I enjoyed that experience, and our kids nowadays don't have that opportunity to do that with everything that's going on in the world.
It teaches etiquette, especially young people. Teaches them etiquette, teaches them that, you know, you can come right in your own community and have a really nice, intimate dinner.
And while the restaurant is only a few months into building its impact, Love says it can only continue with support from those both inside and outside of the community.
How do you change the paradigm of violence? You change the paradigm of violence by bringing the beautification of the community, right? So when you're going down the corridors of the inner cities all over the nation, but Chicago, you see nothing but dilapidated buildings on the thoroughfares. It's like a criminal's haven. But what if the development of the thoroughfares are present and there are businesses all through there, then the element changes. So you don't have to go to the Vision, you don't have to go to Sheffield, you don't have to go up north to have these experiences. The experiences are right in your own backyard.
It's important for people to know that they don't have to take their dollars outside of the community to get a high quality meal. And so many times we've had to. So we will support it and we will ensure that this business builds a legacy and is a lasting business in the Lawndale community.
The Grill Pound Cake.
Wow, that's so good. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
The Soul Food Lounge is open Wednesday through Sunday evenings with extended hours on the weekends. Visit our website for more information. Brandis.
Who's hungry, Paris? Still to come on Chicago Tonight, why January has been unseasonably warm and when temps will fall again. We're one-on-one with the state's climatologist. The city's historic LaSalle Street corridor has fallen on hard times, but plans to rejuvenate the area are beginning to take shape. And as an increasing number of migrants and asylum seekers are making their homes in Chicago, we look at what it actually means to be a sanctuary city. But first, some more of today's top stories. We heard earlier in the show a group of sheriffs are standing up against the state's new ban on so-called assault weapons, and now the first lawsuits have been filed against the law. An emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning in a case that was filed today in downstate Effingham. Attorney Thomas DeVore is representing more than 860 plaintiffs in the case, arguing that the new law violates the Constitution's Equal Protections Clause. Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the bill on January 10th. The new Illinois law bans the sale of some semi-automatic firearms. People who own those types of guns must register them with the Illinois State Police by January 1st, 2024. Noncompliance can be a Class 2 felony. Chicago police are searching for a hammer-wielding man who shouted homophobic slurs and smashed the front door of a lesbian-owned pub in Rogers Park. The attacker followed and threatened a man and woman entering our public house on Jarvis Avenue. Once inside, the man reportedly called them a gay slur and challenged them to a fight before being shouted out of the pub. Outside, he then pulled out a hammer and shattered the glass of the front door and fled. People inside ran for the back of the restaurant, unsure if the sounds came from a gunshot. The community around the Rogers Park business is now raising money to replace the door. Aurora Pride and the ACLU file a federal lawsuit challenging Aurora's special events ordinance that led to its Pride Parade fiasco last summer. Aurora's Pride Parade was on, off, and then on again after the ordinance allowed Aurora officers to refuse to work the annual LGBTQ parade. The lawsuit seeks an injunction preventing the use of Aurora's special events ordinance, which Aurora Pride and the ACLU call unconstitutional. In a statement released by the ACLU, quote, "Our Constitution does not give the mayor or the police a veto over whether or not a parade or demonstration goes forward, simply because they do not like the message of the organizers." It has been an unseasonably warm start to the year. With temperatures averaging in the mid to high 30s, Chicago is seeing its fourth warmest January on record as of yesterday. But don't get too excited. The warmth, of course, can't last forever. It is winter after all. There are growing indications that we'll be returning to much more typical winter weather next week. But first, to discuss why these temps have been so warm and where they are headed is Illinois State climatologist Trent Ford. Trent, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, always good to be on.
So how unusual is this weather that we've been experiencing?
Actually, very unusual. Yeah, as you mentioned in the opening, the fourth warmest start to January on record through at least the 16th. The only years that were warmer, 1880, 1939, 2006. So, 150-plus year record in Chicago. So very unusual for this time of the year to have, these kind of temperatures.
What would you attribute this warmth to?
Yeah, so, if you remember back to right around Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, we had a very cold pattern, and that kind of moved out of the way around the 28th to 29th of December. And since then, we've had some variability, but the larger scale atmospheric pattern that has actually kept a lot of California very wet for that time of period has actually kept our winds coming out of the south and southwest, bringing us unseasonably warm, somewhat humid air. And like I said, although there's been some day-to-day variability, it's just kept temperatures elevated anywhere between 8 and 12 degrees above normal for the last really almost 3 weeks now. And so that persistence of that pattern is really what's unusual. It's not really unusual to get a couple days here or there with highs in the 40s or 50s. Everyone goes out and enjoys it in Chicago, and then we back into the 20s. But the persistence of this pattern, I think, has been what's been pretty unusual.
And of course, it sounds like it's coming to an end soon. What weather can we expect going forward?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is winter. Winter tends to regress back to normal at some point. And so it looks like this pattern will be shifting. At least models have increasing confidence in sort of a shifting pattern to closer to normal, if not below normal temperatures for the last week of January. So the rest of this week, early part of next week, still looking fairly mild, highs in the low to mid 30s, if not upper 30s. But then we begin to shift to actually a chance of below normal temperatures. Just to give you an idea, normal for the last week of January January are highs right around 30, 31 degrees, right around close to that freezing mark. And so below normal temperatures means we're probably seeing highs in the mid to upper 20s. So, yeah, it's definitely moving out of the way. It looks like it's going to be moving out of the way the last week of January.
So getting closer to normal, which by Chicago's terms means colder than it is right now.
Cold. Yeah.
How is climate change playing a role in all of this, Trent?
Yeah, so one of the biggest, I guess, trends that we've seen in Illinois the last century or so is increasing temperatures in all seasons, but winter is actually warmed at a faster rate than all the other seasons. And so this is kind of par for the course. What this means is that because that kind of background climate is warming in the wintertime, it makes it much more likely that we have these warm periods of time and that they persist for a longer period of time. So the fingerprint of climate change is definitely on patterns like this, where we get an extended period of time of very warm, relatively warm, I should say, temperatures in the wintertime. And projections indicate that the warming trend that we've seen over the last 100 years is likely, very likely, going to continue into the future. So these sort of mild winter temperatures are something that we're sort of looking at as kind of a bellwether for future decades in Chicago.
What impacts do these warmer winters, though, have on the environment?
Yeah, so, there are some positive impacts, and that is just a reduced exposure of folks to extreme cold temperatures that we can be having this time of year, and that's especially the case for housing insecure folks. But there are some negative impacts from this as well. Mainly, it is to ecosystems and perennial agricultural crops. So when we have these prolonged periods of warmth, what it does is it affects the kind of dormancy period of both our ecosystems and our agricultural crops, like our apples, trees, peach trees, so on and so forth. And what it means is that they can affect when they open up, when they begin to break dormancy and begin to break buds, flower, things like that. That can do a couple of things for our ecosystems. What it does is it can kind of shift and mismatch the timing of when we flower those ecosystems, when pollinators begin to kind of wake up, and so it can really affect the health of our ecosystems. On the agriculture side, what that can do is an early bud break, early flowering can put us paradoxically at a higher risk of spring freeze damage to things like apples and peaches. So thinking about specialty crops, thinking about ecosystems, it is nice to have temperatures in the 40s and 50s for a few days here and there in Illinois in the middle of winter. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about those sorts of impacts. So kind of pay the piper now or later kind of thing. And we may be seeing impacts from that later on in the spring.
And, to that point, obviously, if climate change, can indicate, increased severity and intensity of some storms and these greater fluctuations, could this also mean much colder cold snaps when they happen in about 30 seconds?
That's a really good question. In 30 seconds is very complicated. The kind of jury is still out on that. There is some evidence that potentially because of more waviness in the jet stream, because of global warming, we may see more cold air outbreaks. But there's another argument that the cold air that comes from the Arctic, where our cold air tends to come from, may actually be warmer because of global warming. So it's still kind of up in the air. Certainly what we will likely continue to see is these sort of increases in what would be considered warm extremes for the winter.
Okay. Trent Ford, that's where we'll have to leave it. Obviously, we'll talk again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Up next, reimagining Chicago's financial district and the incentives to help with that plan. But first, a look at the weather.
Get ready to see apartments, condos, and stores on the famed LaSalle Street corridor if some big city plans come to fruition. LaSalle has famously been the heart of the city's financial district for years, but it is struggling with super high vacancy rates. Major banks and other financial institutions that anchor the district have moved elsewhere. And joining us to talk about these plans is commercial real estate reporter for Crane Chicago Business, Danny Ecker. Danny, always great to see you. First of all, apprise us of the current situation on LaSalle Street as it relates to occupancy of those buildings.
Well, there's not a lot of it. As you mentioned, this is a really historic corridor with these beautiful old office buildings that are now, in many cases, outdated. And there's a lot of vacancy. As you mentioned, a lot of the big banks, Bank of America, BMO Harris, Northern Trust as well, they've all moved and moving people off of LaSalle Street. So you have kind of this somewhat desolate corridor that has buildings with owners who are facing loan defaults or foreclosures. And this is just a street that needs a lot of new investment. And that's what the city actually is trying to incentivize by getting developers to work with them and saying, hey, could we turn some of these office buildings into something else, maybe apartments with some mixed use and retail elements to make this the middle of downtown vibrant again?
And tell us the incentives that are on the table here for developers.
Yeah, so the city in the fall rolled out this program called LaSalle Reimagined. They're basically saying, look, if some developers will come in and invest heavily in turning some of these office buildings into apartments with a big affordable housing component as well, we're going to offer TIF money. There's $197 million in the LaSalle Central TIF district as of a year ago that could be doled out. There are other tax credits you get for preserving or restoring older historic buildings. There's a new state Affordable Illinois program that incentivizes affordable housing developments. There's also new small business grants that the city is trying to roll out to retailers to get them to come back to LaSalle Street. So there's a pretty impressive menu of options when you look at what developers have in front of them, which they're, in many cases, I think, going to need to be able to make some of these conversions make financial sense.
And there is an impressive menu of options in terms of proposals that developers have put on the table, $1.2 billion worth of proposals at this point. So give us some of the highlights.
Yeah, so the city solicited these proposals to saying, hey, we're going to dangle some incentives for you. What ideas do you have, developers, to redevelop some of these buildings? There were 9 different proposals submitted by the late December deadline for 7 different buildings on and near LaSalle Street. Like you said, more than $1.2 billion in projects. There were a couple that stood out that were especially large. One was at 135 South LaSalle. That's the former Bank of America building. Bank of America moved out to a new Wacker Drive tower in 2020. And it was actually the developer of that new tower that has now said, I'm going to partner with the owner of the building where I poached Bank of America from, and we're going to maybe turn this into 430 apartments. It'd be a huge project. So kind of finding a way to capitalize on some of the distress that this developer actually created himself. There's another one at 111 West Monroe. This is a former BMO Harris bank building that the developer, Mike Reschke, who is also notably working with Google to redevelop the Thompson Center, he's planning to cut a big hole in the top of this building, maybe the top 10 or 11 floors, to create a courtyard so that you can turn this big office building into apartments, because obviously some of these office buildings aren't really conducive to apartments. They don't have a lot of interior light. So that's another big one. That would be 349 units. The question for all these is, can they get financing? That's not easy to do. It's not easy to finance any big project these days, let alone one that has potentially a lot of unexpected costs associated with it.
As Daniel Burnham said, make no little plans, though. So what about the Thompson Center, the redevelopment at the hands of Google? Could that catalyze some of these projects on LaSalle?
Absolutely. I mean, that deal alone really has the potential to change the trajectory of downtown coming out of COVID. I mean, that's an area, the Loop went from this sort of area where companies didn't want to be to now Google potentially being an area where it has this magnetic aspect of it where companies want to be near there. And we'll see what Google does to the building and how many people they put there. But certainly if you have potentially thousands of Google employees working at the Thompson Center, there's going to be demand for housing right by there. And that's the kind of thing where, you know, you could have a lot of wind in the sails of developers that want to turn office buildings into apartments. And keep in mind, you know, the reason developers are doing this in the first place and looking at these projects is the fundamentals for apartments downtown right now are fantastic. The highest rents they've ever seen in many cases. So that this is a really compelling property type for developers to consider with such great demand and such weak demand for office space.
I can already hear potential residents saying, well, there's no green space, there's no stores, there aren't really any restaurants anymore around there. What about those concerns?
That's a big challenge. You know, that's why some of those small business grants are probably going to be pretty essential to get, you know, people, you're going to want to live there where you're going to want places to eat and shop and get groceries that are hopefully nearby that you don't have to go to some other neighborhood downtown to get. And, you know, that's making LaSalle Street a place where people want to live is not just as easy as turning a few buildings into apartments. There is one of these buildings that has been turned into apartments, a smaller one on LaSalle Street that has done okay, but you know, it's not an area that has, they had to pile on the amenities and make it so that it's sort of a self-sustaining place because people can't go to many places around there and get things they need and having open space, place for pets, things like that. So that's a big challenge that the city and these developers are going to have to overcome.
And once the sun goes down, it's not the liveliest of neighborhoods these days. All right, Danny Ecker, very interesting plans, though. Thanks very much for joining us.
All right, Paris, thanks a lot.
And up next, what it actually means to be a sanctuary city. That's in a conversation with Joanna Hernandez that first aired on Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. So please stay with us.
You want to walk in.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Chicago's history as a sanctuary city dates back to 1985, when then Mayor Harold Washington issued an executive order prohibiting city employees from enforcing federal immigration laws. But since that time, the term sanctuary city and more recently welcoming city have evolved beyond law enforcement implications. As an increasing number of migrants and asylum seekers are making their homes in Chicago, the city's government and community organizations are grappling with what being a welcoming city means for all of its residents. Joining us now with more are Father Larry Doling, pastor of St. Agatha Church in Northdale, Nubia Willman, Chicago's Chief Engagement Officer, and Anna Solano, Community Intake Specialist at Airy House. Now, Father Doling, I want to start with you. Now, we know churches have a long history of becoming these sanctuaries for refugees and immigrants. How would you say the word sanctuary has evolved over the years for the Archdiocese?
I think overall, it's, you know, part of the mission of the church in general is to welcome everyone. And so there's a whole history of, you know, ethnic groups moving to Chicago, you know, over the hundreds of years now, and the church has always welcomed that, you know, welcomed those groups, you know, and in many cases founded parishes around those particular ethnic groups. Most recently, the influx of the men, women, and children seeking asylum. You know, again, the church is stepping up to respond, you know, to support these individuals, these families who are trying to reestablish themselves. So it really is continuing a long tradition of the church, and really, you know, the essence of our faith is to care for, you know, those who are, are struggling, and by doing so, to share our gifts with them, that empowers us as well.
Yeah, and Nubia, I want to ask you the same question. I've noticed welcoming city is also being used. Can you tell me how the structure has expanded over the years to offer more support? What does the administration believe it's obligating to do as a welcoming city?
Yes, absolutely. So throughout the past decades, we've used the term sanctuary city. Under Mayor Lightfoot's administration, we've really focused on using the word welcoming, and that's on purpose and for a reason. Often when we think about sanctuary, it's very much about protecting against the federal government, against ICE, and whatever iteration of that is in the years past. Welcoming is much more holistically facing. It's really about embracing people, making them feel welcomed. And so when we do that here in the city, it's not just about protection from ICE or the federal government. It's also about integration. It's also about celebration. So it's really important for us to use that word. And legally speaking, we do have a welcoming city ordinance that does have some specific metrics and things that we're supposed to abide by. But overall, our policy really is through the lens of being a welcoming entity as much as possible.
And Anna, Airy House works to provide services to immigrant families. Do you think Chicagoans embrace being a sanctuary city?
I do. On my birthday, the first buses came, and then we received a bunch of support from different groups, all walks of life. Our phone line at Erie was busy with neighbors that really just wanted to help and like Nubia said, be welcoming.
Okay, and as we know, there has been collaborations with the city and different groups to help the influx of asylum seekers who've been bused from Texas. I've had the chance to speak with some of them, and this is what one of the questions that keeps popping up. Listen to one person who didn't want to be named had to say.
Gustaría pues preguntarle que cómo haríamos para que nos ayudaran con el permiso de trabajo, qué es lo que más necesitamos para trabajar y así sacar a nuestras familias adelante.
And Nubia, I want to go to you. Is there any talks about temporary work permits? I mean, there's people who've mentioned they've had a hard time even connecting with any lawyers to even begin that immigration process.
Absolutely. Work permits and getting here to work, that's really most of the people's goals, and they want to be self-sustaining and want to be able to provide for themselves and their family. The federal government is in charge of providing work authorization to people, and so someone can only work if they have a valid work authorization. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide that. It's really dependent on the federal government to step up in this moment and provide the necessary resources. We continue to advocate for expedited work permits, for expanded humanitarian parole, and for other types of federal support so that folks are able to do what they want, which is work. And so we continue to do that, but at the same time, we have to work with the folks on the ground, and we absolutely work with our legal partners here to ensure that they're providing legal orientation and continue the discussion for more robust legal services so that folks can have individual intakes and eventual representation if they are eligible for some immigration remedy.
And Father Larry, what is your take on this? You've been a priest at St. Agatha Parish for 17 years now. What do you say to those people who come to your parish and ask you about how can they get a work permit? What do you tell them?
So mainly, I'm actually a minister, a pastor in the African American community, St. Agatha, St. Martin Porus, but we have a growing population of Latino people coming, joining us in the community. For those who have shown up, we typically try to make sure that they have the basic needs and then refer them to networks that can support them, like Catholic Charities and some of the city shelters to be able to do that. The work issue is as she said, is a major issue because inviting them or telling them where to go to get work is something that we really can't do. But many of them are actually going out on their own. They want to work. They want to start providing and building a new life for their families. So a lot of that is already happening.
What are those words of encouragement that you provide when they do come to you?
Mainly that they're not alone. Mainly that they have the support, and they have the support of the church community. Many of our parishioners, again, in the African American community, have been just welcome them and embrace them, and again, just assure them of the support. We always give them referrals. We always make sure that they connect with larger groups that are going to be supportive of a network for them to be able to support them on their journey of rebuilding their lives.
And Anna, you've been working with families. In your opinion, is the city and state doing enough in your perspective? Do you think that a work permit is a viable option?
I think that we're doing what we can, but like Nubia said, this is at the federal level, and unfortunately, the way that the law is written right now, from my perspective, people are stuck in a catch-22 type of situation where, to apply for a work permit or asylum, they need to pay these crazy fees, but they're not allowed to work. So it's kind of like a catch-22 situation, unfortunately.
And so far, we know there has been more than 3,000 migrants who have arrived in Chicago, not counting those who didn't arrive here on buses. So I want to go to you, Father Larry. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the sponsorship program that the Archdiocese is working on? What is that vision to help those refugees? So
the coordination with Catholic Charities and the diocese is really focused on encouraging parishes that are near some of the city shelters, and I just want to affirm city shelters are doing a great job. Are trying to offer support, case management, and just basic resources to the families in those shelters. We're in the process of instituting a parish sponsorship program, parishes that can sponsor a family, provide housing for them in local housing, pay for the housing basically for an initial 6 to 9 month period. A case manager is assigned from Catholic Charities, walks with the family, but also works with the committee within the parish to say, this is what this family needs, can you help finding it, and those sorts of things.
And when does that program begin? When is it expected to begin?
So we've already done some information sessions. We have about 50 parishes that are interested in immediately in doing that. Probably within the next 2 months, 3 months, we will be fully instituting that.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Our thanks to Father Larry Darling, Nubia William, and Anna Solano. Back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. City Council is set to vote on increased protections for trans Chicagoans and those seeking abortions.
And Illinois lawmakers enact safeguards to gender-affirming care. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.